All right. All right. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you folks here. We might get a few more people joining, all of my Magoosh students there. And then we have some other folks tuning in with us out there on YouTube because we're streaming this to all of you out there. So welcome to everybody. I need to make sure that we are recording here. So just to let everybody know, we're going to start recording this session in just a moment, but I need to get my Zoom tools going here to do that. One moment. Oh, shoot. There we go. Okay, so there we go. Finally got it set up there. I've got a lot of things on my screen here that I'm looking at the chats coming in when they come in and all kinds of other stuff. So I've always got a lot of things to move around on my desktop. Anyway, welcome to all of you. My name is Eliot. I'm the IELTS instructor here at Magoosh. And like I said just a moment ago, we've got folks here who have tuned in who are Magoosh students, and welcome to all of you. We will be doing a number of things here in our Zoom meeting that related to the topic of speaking. And we're going to be thinking specifically about overcoming nerves and other common problems that students face on the speaking test. We will have a few activities that we'll be able to go through together here throughout this lesson. I will be doing also a lot of talking, and I want to provide some resources and materials to all of you that you can use. Everything today is completely free that I'm going to recommend and publicly available, which is always nice. I like to give stuff out that you can use and don't have to pay for. All of you out there on YouTube, also welcome. We may not be able to get you into all of the interactive activities that we're doing throughout this lesson because they rely on being a Magoosh student to be able to do some of them, but you're going to be able to hear and participate in the session here today, and I'm really happy to have all of you here participating. So let's jump in. I'm going to, if you would please today, we've got a good number of folks here on the call, on the meeting, and a good number of folks out there on YouTube. So if you wouldn't mind today, I would prefer if you have questions or things you want to ask about through the lesson, let's use the chat feature today instead of unmuting yourself so that we can try to take things in order. I'm going to talk about a few of the topics here, and we will have some chance for interaction here, but doing it through the chat is going to be the best way so we can organize things. If a question comes in and it's not directly related to the thing that we're talking about at that moment, I may tell you that we'll save that question to the end. There should be plenty of time at the end today to answer a bunch of questions. So I'll try to make sure to leave time because I know you might have questions that are not necessarily directly related to what I'm talking about, but related to speaking topics generally, and that's great. And I'd be happy to take those questions at the end. Okay. All right. So let's get started here today talking about speaking. The way I'm going to organize this particular lesson is to give you a number of tips related to this issue that is on your screen now in the title of the lesson. Okay, so thinking about working with the work I've done with students and thinking about IELTS students generally, and what is it that causes the most difficulty for folks, especially things that they can practice, work on and do practice and exercises with to help you overcome some of these problems so that you can score as high as you possibly can on the speaking test. So that's what we're going to focus on today, doing a variety of things here. Okay, so let's jump in and just get started, and we'll take it where it needs to go. Okay, so first of all, I just want to make a couple of points about the speaking section. Okay, it is obviously compared to other language tests you may have taken before. I think the IELTS speaking test feels for some folks kind of intimidating, and it can make you feel pretty nervous. And I think that's understandable because you have to get in the room with an IELTS interviewer. You've only got a short time, 11 to 15 minutes maximum is the amount of time that you are going to be in there. And that's your limited opportunity to kind of show your fluency and your ability. So I think it's understandable that folks feel kind of nervous for this experience. But being nervous and being ready to go and being on your toes can be a positive thing. Okay, so if you're feeling nervous, if it's becoming a problem for you, okay, we need to address those things, whatever it is that's causing you not to perform at your highest level. But I think you would, all of us out there have experiences where we've had to perform something, right? Maybe you play a musical instrument. Maybe you are into sports and you play whatever sport, maybe in front of people or something like that at some point. We have these experiences in our past where we've got to have to get up, maybe give an important meeting or an important presentation at school, right? We've got to get up in front of someone and perform. And that the nerves that you feel can be a positive thing. It can cause you to focus and to be on your toes. And that's what we want to do. We want to identify the things that are really causing you problems, and we want to harness the positive energy, that positive feeling that you can get going into an interview like this and believing in yourself and believing that you're going to do the best you possibly can. So don't necessarily look at being nervous as necessarily a bad thing. We just need to figure out what's causing you your performance issues, if that is something you're facing. In my view, I think smart preparation for the IELTS speaking test is one of the best ways to overcome the bad effects of being nervous. Okay, so being prepared, doing as much as you possibly could to know what to expect on the test and how you are going to be able to perform your absolute best on it prior to the exam is, I think, one of the best ways to overcome some of those negative effects of being nervous. Okay, so let's talk about a few of those specific things and unpack this idea a little bit in this lesson so that you can get a sense of what I'm talking about here. All right, so tip number one, practice with real exam conditions, right? So this is absolutely critical for your practice and preparation for the test. This means that you are going to use a timer to time yourself. You are going to follow the directions for each section very strictly in your own practice. And you are going to practice the kinds of things, the kinds of responses that you're learning about. Now, if you're a Magoosh student or if you're studying materials about the speaking test, you're probably learning a lot about some of the strategies and some of the approaches to take to each of the question types that are on the test. And those are the things you need to be disciplined about recreating when you practice at home. Okay, so we're going to talk more about that in a second, but I first want to start off for the students, the Magoosh students here who are in the Zoom call. I've got a poll I'd like for you to take, a quick poll. For those of you out there on YouTube, you won't be able to take the poll, but I'm going to publish the poll on the screen. I think you'll be able to see the results of the poll after we're done. So there are 5 quick questions I'd like for you to answer. And these are anonymous. So if you just give your best answer, I think some of this will be easy and some of it might be a little unfamiliar. But these questions I'm going to put out for the students on the Zoom call right now relate to the setup of the test and replicating the exam conditions. I just want to see how you answer all of these. So everybody out there, you should have on your screen 5 quick questions, okay? And we're going to go through them in just a second. And like I said, this is anonymous, so folks won't know who answered what here. Would you please go through and answer these questions quickly? I'll just give you, it should just be fast, 2 minutes. For those of you on YouTube, I'll scroll through. You should be able to see the questions on the screen, and you can see what questions the Magoosh students are answering right now. Okay, take another couple of seconds. I'll give you about 30 more seconds here to answer, and then we're going to talk about these questions a little bit. Okay. Looks like almost everybody's voted. Try to get your votes in here. Okay, good. So I'm not sure that the folks on YouTube can see the poll questions. It's not displaying, at least in my view. But looks like almost everybody's voted. I try to get your votes in here. Sorry about the audio. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'll read the questions and the answers that folks had so that people on YouTube can also follow along. But I want to get into our discussion related to these questions. Okay. Some of them. So I'm not sure that the folks on YouTube can see the poll. Sorry about the audio. I had a little mix up there. Okay, that should be fixed though. Anyway, here we go. So question number 1. I'm going to end the poll here. Question number 1. If you spend too long answering a question, the interviewer will probably do what? The best response, the response that most people said was cut off your response and ask a new question. That is correct. That is correct. So if you're in your interview and you happen to be talking about something at length and with a lot of detail, the interviewer is likely to tell you that you need to move on, or that they will just politely kind of stop what you're saying and ask you a different question so that you move on. The reason is they have to get through a certain number of questions for your interview. And if you're taking too long, it threatens to sort of push things over the time limit that's allowed for the interview. So as you're thinking about recreating exam conditions when you are practicing for the test, you should be trying to focus on the amount of time you are taking to respond to questions. Okay, if you are responding with really long answers, especially in like part 1 where the answers are supposed to be coming a little bit quicker, that is not realistic practice. Your practice ought to be very strategic. You should be responding to questions with the amount of length and detail that's required for that particular question in that section of the test. Okay, so tip number 1 here related to recreating exam conditions is to make sure that the timing of your responses is similar to what it's going to be on test day. That gives you a feeling for what the length of responses ought to be. Number 2, when the interviewer hands you the task 2 topic card, you will have exactly how many minutes to plan your response. So the correct answer here was also B. You will have 1 minute exactly, okay? And so that's what you need to also replicate when you are practicing part 2 of the test. Don't cheat, okay? Get your question. You get your topic card that you have from the interview that you're practicing at that time. Don't cheat. Don't give yourself more time than 1 minute. You need to practice feeling what it's like to plan your response in the 1 minute that you have before you're supposed to start speaking. Okay, that's really important. You need to develop that feeling for what you will be able to accomplish with that minute that you have, okay? So that's tip number 2. If you run out of things to say in a question, you should, all right, now we have some controversy here with the answers. One of the responses was change the topic slightly and keep talking. Or the other popular response was you should stop talking, okay? All right, so this one was a tricky one. I think that there is a case for both here. But if you have answered a question directly and you have explained yourself just a little bit, then it actually can be more beneficial to just stop talking and wait for the interviewer to give you the next question. You don't need to speak at length for each and every question on the IELTS interview, right? Especially in part 1, your answers can be fairly short and it's not a problem at all. So don't feel like you need to extend answers for a long, long time, right? And especially if you need to change the topic a little bit, it can be best to just stop where you are and let the interviewer give you another question to ask about. Now, if you have said almost nothing in response to one of the questions, if your answer is extremely short, like one sentence only, you may need to find a way to sort of extend your answer a little more. And if the only way you can think to do that is to change things around slightly, maybe that's okay. But one of the dangers on the speaking test is that you start getting way off topic, and that can actually pull down your score a little bit because then you're not really responding to the question that they asked you. So a strategy for when you're not quite sure what to say is to stop talking. Again, recreate the exam conditions when you are practicing and get into the habit of doing this instead of practicing something else, like extending answers by changing the topic in some way, okay? So there is tip number 3. All right, number 4, part 1 and part 3 of the speaking test usually take about how many minutes? Oh, nobody could agree on this. This was a tricky one. Part 1 and part 3 of the test actually take about 4 to 5 minutes on average. Okay, but could it be 3 to 4 minutes? Yes. Could it be 5 to 6 minutes? Yes. It can go on either side of those things, but the average amount of time for a part 1 and part 3 section is about 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, so you should also have, when you are practicing, you should set it up so that you are taking that amount of time on both of those sections. Not less, not more. It's good to practice with those exact time constraints. Okay, number 5, last one. True or false? To answer a part 1 question completely, you must speak for at least 30 seconds. Okay, we had most people saying false and some people saying true. That answer is false. You don't need to speak for a minimum of 30 seconds for your part 1 questions. It can be good, especially if you have some way to extend your answer. And by the way, we're going to be talking about extending answers later in this lesson, so we'll even get to a little bit of practice with that. But you can have shorter answers. I think an ideal answer is about 2 to 3 sentences for part 1. Sometimes you might have more to say, but there are some questions that are very basic, right? And very quick and easy to answer. And 2 sentences where you just simply answer the question and maybe explain quickly what you mean by your answer. That short answer might take less than 30 seconds. And it's okay. It's not going to pull down your score. So you don't need, when you are practicing, you don't need to have every part 1 answer extended. It doesn't need to be a long answer necessarily, and you should practice that kind of thing, especially when the questions are quick and easy to answer. Your interviewer is prepared with lots of questions for you for part 1 that they can continue answering questions for you. So practice that. Don't feel like you need to extend every answer, especially in part 1, to a long length beyond 30 seconds. It's not actually necessary, and actually it can be bad practice when you are doing things like extending answers and changing the topic or getting off topic. That actually can be practice that's not very beneficial for you, okay? All right, so the key point here, the point for number one that we have here is you need to, oops, I moved on, didn't mean to. You need to practice with real exam conditions. That is the way you are going to get the feeling for the test, and that feeling for the timing and for how long your responses should be and how it relates to the clock that's ticking that the interviewer is using to time you throughout your interview. That preparation gives you a feeling for how you ought to respond on exam day, and there's no easy, quick way around it. You just need to practice with those conditions as much as you possibly can. Okay. All right. So that's tip number one here. I can pause quickly. I'm looking at the chat here. If anybody has questions, I can take a question in the chat. And if not, then we'll continue moving on. I do see a question that came in through YouTube, a general question about band score. I'll save that one for the end. We'll talk about that during our general Q&A time. Okay. Anybody with questions? Okay, one moment. All right. So everybody, I'm gonna make sure, especially those on Zoom, let's stay on mute today and just use the chat feature for asking questions, okay? Because the audio doesn't play very nicely between YouTube and Zoom when we share those, okay? Good. Okay, so if you have a question, just put it through on the chat for today. All right, good. Let's keep moving here. Let's keep going. Tip number two. So very quickly, we don't need to spend as much time on this one. Tip number two is to educate yourself about what to expect on test day. Okay, this is a very basic thing, but this is a big one for overcoming nerves. In particular, when you know exactly what the experience is going to be like. I've got a couple of resources here to recommend to you. I'm going to share links to the resources here in just a moment. But first one is, if you go on YouTube, there are many sample IELTS interviews that I think are highly beneficial to watch. Okay, they give you a sense of what the interview, if you haven't done an IELTS interview before, they give you a good sense of what it's going to be like in their room there with the interviewer, how they're going to ask you questions. And then you can also see some samples of some really good responses from students, who have scored really well. You could also, it's also, I think, beneficial to look at some students who did not score as well, so that you can sort of analyze what went wrong, and what you would like to improve with the interview. I'm gonna make sure this is muted. There we go. I'm gonna share one here. Don't want that to play. There we go. I'm going to share one here in the chat that I think is a good example. You can put you can open this tab and look at it later. This is a sample of a really high scoring interview that gives you a really good sense of what it's going to be like, right? And if you actually IELTS. The official IELTS channel has a bunch of videos that they've put on YouTube, and many of them have to give you samples of students responding to interview questions. And so I recommend using that. Go and look at those responses to see what it's going to be like, especially if you've never sat for an IELTS interview before, okay? So that's one thing I'd recommend. I'd also going to put another resource in here for you. And this is another one from IELTS itself. So this nice, it's always nice to use as many official materials as possible. But This page is not, it's nice when IELTS puts out some content for folks to use for their preparation. I would love to see them put even more out there because it's so beneficial to students as you're trying to prepare and learn about what to expect. This is a page that IELTS has put together giving you a sense of what what's on the test and what's in each section of the test, okay? And so this is another nice resource to use as kind of a background resource to understand what's going to be there for you on the test. Again, just educating yourself about what to expect. And this last one that I'll also put in the chat for everybody. This last one I think is really important as well. This one is just test day advice that IELTS provides, things that you should know to expect on exam day, okay? And so this page relates to the whole test, but specifically for the speaking test, knowing what's going to happen when you show up, what you need to bring, what you should not bring, all of those things. Again, if our topic here is thinking about how to manage nerves and how to manage your sort of feelings related to the speaking test, one thing that causes unneeded stress for many students is that they wait until the day or two before their exam to look at sort of what the requirements are for test day and what to expect at the exam center and all those kinds of things. But don't do that to yourself. Plan way ahead and educate yourself about what it's going to be like at the test center and what to expect, so that you're not feeling those nerves unnecessarily because you weren't quite prepared far in advance. Okay, so anyway, this is not a complicated topic here. I just wanted to share these resources as suggestions for how to deal with this thing that can cause nervousness and tension when I think it's unnecessary with just a little preparation ahead of test day. So tip number 2, know what to expect at your exam center. You may need to call your exam center if there are questions you have. And get all of your questions about what it's going to be like on test day answered well ahead of the test day, so that you can focus on other things and focus on what's really important on test day. Okay, good. Let's keep going. Tip number 3, exercise your fluency. Whoops, excuse me. So what do we mean by this? So one of the things that causes students a lot of stress and strain for the speaking test is that their fluency, their ability to speak quickly, or at least at a normal rate of speed, a speed that they might in their own native language, right? That is a skill that is not easily acquired, and it is actually, unfortunately, it is easy to lose a lot of ability with fluency. I bet a lot of you out there have experienced this kind of thing where maybe you've been practicing or using English for quite a long time, or maybe you speak another language that you learned that isn't a native language for you. And you know, if you leave it without using it regularly, and you don't practice speaking and conversing in that language, you lose your ability to speak rapidly and at a natural rate of speed. I think of this kind of like music or like athletics, where you know, if you're a runner and you haven't been running regularly, it doesn't matter how accomplished you were at running 5 years ago. If you've been sitting on the couch for 5 years and not running, you're not going to be able to run at the same distance and the same speed that you could before. I think musicians face a similar thing, where if you put your instrument down for a while, you lose that ability, even though it's in there somewhere, right? Maybe you're a guitar player or you play piano. You have the ability in there, but maybe you've forgotten the songs, and you've forgotten, maybe your fingers don't quite work as well as they used to. Okay, that happens with speaking ability also. And it is really important as you are preparing for the speaking test that you are exercising, and I'm using that word very intentionally, you're exercising your fluency. You are treating it like you have a concert that you have to give in piano, or that you have a big athletic event coming up and you need to train your body and your mind for that event. And that's a good way to think about the IELTS speaking test. So you need to be doing things. If you don't have a teacher or a class that you're attending to work on conversation, and by the way, Magoosh students, you have Conversation Club on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This could be a place where you practice your fluency regularly. But if you can't attend those, or you don't have a person or a place where you are speaking English regularly, then you need to create those opportunities for yourself. It is even beneficial to talk to yourself at home by yourself in English if that is all that's available to you to do. The act of taking your ideas and verbalizing them in English is beneficial for your fluency, even if you can't speak with somebody regularly. Okay, so a step above that, if you've got anyone in your house who can interview you or talk to you in English, even if they don't understand what they're saying, even if you just have a list of questions that they're reading to you that are like IELTS questions, that could also be very beneficial practice, right? You've got a question coming from someone and you've got to respond to it in real time like you will have to do on the speaking test, okay? That is also beneficial practice, even though it's obviously not as good as actually having a teacher or someone who is a native English speaker who can go through an IELTS interview with you. That would be the ideal practice. But if you don't have that available, you need to do something else to exercise your fluency, okay? So here are some things we can do. I've got some resources here on the screen. Oh, come on. Let me do this. All right. So I'm going to click on these so I can get the links here. So Magoosh, we have a free resource here that I'll share again with everybody. And this is a PDF we've put together that has lots and lots of IELTS speaking questions, particularly for part 1. There's some part 2 topic cards there as well. This is something you can use to exercise your fluency at home. Go through, take a few every day, and take, I don't know, 15 minutes every day. Can you take 15 minutes and go through and answer a bunch of questions out loud or with a partner? Okay, that would be good exercise, getting your mouth and your brain moving together with questions that are like the test. Okay, that would be good practice. Here's another one, and I apologize, but I don't really apologize. I share this resource a lot with folks because I think it's so useful for you. Here's another one from the New York Times, and I won't spend a long time on this because I've shared this in a few places before. But here are 550 prompts. Now these are for writing, but you can use them for speaking practice. And what I love about this site and this resource is that these questions are going to be about similar topics, similar ideas as part 3 of the test. And that can be the toughest one to study for because the questions become a little more difficult and there aren't a lot of questions out there that you can get access to practice on your own. But this website has tons of questions that would be good to answer. And when you click in here, here's a sample of a question. They also have related sort of article that's related to this topic. You can read this, you can develop some vocabulary from this, and then they have questions down at the bottom. They have questions that you can answer and answer them out loud. You could also use this for writing practice if you want, but I think the clearest use for this is with part 3 of the speaking test as a resource for practicing your fluency on your own. Okay. All right. So that's resource number 2. Oops. And then I've got one more that I'd like to give you. Oh man, I'm sorry. Every time I click here, it wants to advance my slide. All right. Last one, last resource for working on your fluency here. Put that in the chat for you. This is something that's on our blog, and I think this is really beneficial for anyone out there who, again, who does not have a teacher that you're working with regularly, like a class you attend, which I think is many of you out there. And also, if you have some time to develop your English skills, right? If you have only 2 weeks until your IELTS exam, it's unlikely your fluency is going to improve dramatically, and it's also unlikely that your grammar is going to improve dramatically or your vocabulary. If you've only got 2 weeks to study, you should be focusing on just learning about the test and what to do strategically on the test and how to answer particular questions. But if you have more time than that, a month or more, you can actually do things to really develop your English skills, okay? And that's what this resource that I put in the chat for you, the link there, that's what this is about. There are ideas here for how to develop an English language learning sort of study schedule that you can work on over, the idea here is that you would take about 10 weeks for this. But if you have a shorter amount of time or a longer amount of time, you could extend that however works for your schedule. But anyway, I just want to point out there are a few ideas on this, this study schedule related to speaking and development, some exercises that you can do. 2-minute speeches that there's an activity there where you are working on the skills that will help you for part 2 of the test, okay? So anyway, there are others on here as well and others activities related to other parts of the test. But if you need a self-study program for developing your English skills, this is a place to start, and this resource is something that could be beneficial for you. And related to our topic here, it is something that you can use to develop your fluency a little bit, okay? So anyway, a resource there. I saw a hand go up among students here on the Zoom call. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. There's one question that I'm saving for the end that came in from YouTube, and I saw earlier that a student asked about giving ideas about brainstorming in 1 minute. Okay, so for that question, actually, we're going to talk about that topic in a moment here. So I'm going to save that brainstorming question for just in a few minutes. We will talk about that. But if you have a question, instead of raising your hand this time, let's put them in the chat because we need to. There's some audio issues that come up if we unmute ourselves. Okay, all right, but let's keep going. All right, now I want to get you all practicing something here, extending your answers, okay? So one problem, now this isn't really related to nervousness, but this is an issue that ends up impacting students' scores, and it is something that is a pretty easy thing to fix, but it takes some practice and it takes some knowledge about what you're supposed to do to fix this issue. The tip here, tip number 4, is that you should practice extending your answers in all sections. Okay, so earlier in this lesson, we talked about how in part 1, you may not need to have super long answers for each response. And that is true. You don't necessarily need to have a response that goes above, let's say, 30 seconds, something like that. All right, but every answer that you give on the speaking test, whether it's part 1 or part 3, part 2 is a little different. We'll talk about part 2 in a second. But part 1 and part 3, where you're just having the back and forth questions with the interviewer, you should do what you can in every question to answer it directly to answer that question very directly with a sentence, and then explain what you meant by that very direct answer. This is the habit, this is the skill that you should develop as you're practicing for the speaking test. Again, for all of you out there who are coming to Conversation Club, this is something that we talk about and that we recommend as a way to respond strategically to the IELTS speaking questions, that you answer the question directly every single time with maybe one sentence answer, and then you get directly into your explanation. Okay, so what do we mean by that? So here's an example. Let's imagine we have this question here. What was one of your favorite places to visit as a child? Okay, this would probably be in part 1 of the test. And so what we're talking about here is your first response, the thing that you should be practicing as you are practicing questions for the speaking test, is your brain should immediately be like, okay, I need to provide the very clear and direct answer to this question. So it should look something like this. I loved going to, oops, of course there's a typo. I loved going to the local library. I should put the in there. That's going to bother me, so I'm just going to do it. There we go. All right. There we are, fixed. All right, I loved going to the local library. All right, that is a direct answer. The question was, what's a place you enjoyed going to? And I answered it with one clear sentence, okay? Now, one of the skills, one of the small things you can do to even boost up your score just a little bit is always to try to paraphrase a little bit based on the question. So instead of repeating language, a lot of language from the question, I changed it just slightly, and it didn't change the meaning of the question or my response to the question significantly. When I said, instead of using, I could have said, you know, one of my favorite places was the library, the local library. Okay, that would be an okay answer. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you can do anything to paraphrase a little bit in your direct response, that's really good. And that is something you should be practicing as you are trying to think of, as you're practicing your questions for the speaking test, right? So little paraphrase there. Now, I'm not done. Okay, I need to explain myself a little bit because I've just provided this one sentence, very simple answer. Okay, and if that's all I have to say about it, well, okay, but you should, the tip here is you should be practicing then giving a little explanation. And for part 1 of the test in particular, it doesn't need to be a long explanation. Just maybe why this place was a favorite place for you would be a really good thing to add here. Okay, so I'm going to do that. So my extended answer, I loved going to the local library because the librarians often had a story time for the kids in which they read books out loud. They would read the story in different voices and use props to bring it to life. Okay, so this is enough. This, not a long response for part 1. Maybe I could have said more, but this would be a good example of a clear and focused response to the question that you then take a little bit of time to explain. This is what you should be practicing as you are practicing all your IELTS questions. Direct, paraphrased responses if possible, and then explanations of your answer that directly relate to the first sentence in your response, that direct and clear answer to the question. This is a very simple approach, a very strategic approach to make sure that your answers are as clear as possible to the interviewer who is grading your interview, okay? So let's practice this. I'd like for you to try this a little bit. I've got a question here at the top of the screen. Who is someone you particularly admire? Okay, now the Magoosh students on the Zoom call and all of you students out there on Zoom can do this as well. Let's take a couple of minutes here. And I would like for you to practice the skill that I just put on the screen for the last example. Can you provide a direct answer to this question and paraphrase the language slightly? Okay, so a nice simple sentence. And then can you extend the answer with maybe a sentence or two explanation of what you were saying here, okay? So I'd like for you to try. Let's see, I'm gonna set a timer. I think you should be able to do this in about, let's say 3 minutes, okay? Not gonna take a long time, but enough time to sort of think of a response and write it down. And if for those of you who want to, go ahead and put your extended answer in the chat, and I'll pull out one or two of them. We can take a look at them to analyze how effective they were. Okay, so I'm going to start a clock now, and go ahead and try to provide an extended answer to this question in writing, but as an example of how you might extend an answer. Okay, so I'm going to start the clock now, and you can go ahead. Okay, take another minute and go ahead if you want to. I see some responses coming in from YouTube, and I see responses coming here in our chat. That's good. If you want to, put your response into the chat, and we'll take a look here in just about 45 seconds. Okay, that was 3 minutes, and I'm seeing some really nice responses come in. I'm taking a moment here to read over them. Let's see, let's start. So one response, and you can look in the chat also. If you look there, you can see some of the responses from folks, but for those of you out there on YouTube, I will also read over some of the responses. Let's start with one that's here in the chat. The person I admire is my mother, because when she I think you meant runs, when she runs into a problem, every aspect of life, she stays strong and tries to solve the problem. Good. I like how you directly responded about your mother, and you paraphrased a little bit. You said the person I admire is my mother. Okay, we could maybe paraphrase that just a little more. But then your explanation, your because, and everything that came after the because is very clear. A response that came in from YouTube. I have always thought my mom to be a source of inspiration. Okay, good. There's a paraphrase. I always thought my mom, you would say, I always thought of my mom as a source of information, inspiration, sorry. So that's great. And there's a paraphrase, right? And then the extended answer is, I've always thought of my mom as a source of inspiration as she follows her dreams and ambitions. I aspire to be like her in life. Good, good explanation, good extension of that answer there. Let's look at a couple more. I appreciate my chemistry professor a lot because of her generosity and ability to make things understandable to students. She's always there when students ask for help, not only course related, but also in other issues. That is a very clear extension of the answer, right? And I like the paraphrase at the beginning. I appreciate my chemistry professor a lot. If I'm going to be really picky with that one, I might say maybe appreciation is getting maybe a little too far away from the concept of admiring someone. Appreciate means, oh, yeah, how the things that they do and you're thankful for them, something like that. Admire means you really look up to someone and have a lot of respect for them. And so maybe if I'm really picky, those ideas are getting a little bit far from each other, but I don't want to be, I don't think that would cause a big problem for your score there. I think that would, I think that response was a clear explanation of why your chemistry professor is somebody that you respect and admire. So that made it clear. Okay, another one. I see one come in. We'll just take a couple of more of these and I'll show you my example as well. I adore my father the most because he taught us that being kind, compassionate, and caring towards others is a duty of every human being and to never fail in this duty. Wow, great answer there. Great answer. I adore my father the most. Okay, so again, good paraphrase there. Always making sure we're trying not to get too far away from the idea of admire, but I don't want to emphasize that too much for this one and for the last one. I think your explanation of why you adore your father there is a very clear response, a good extension of your answer. Okay, one more. The person that I looked up to is my grandmother. She has a kind heart and always there to support and help me. More things about her is she takes good care and taught a lot of things to my siblings since they were young. Great, good, clear explanation. What I love about these responses and what you should be practicing every time you have IELTS questions that you're practicing, even if you're just by yourself at home doing it in front of a mirror or something like that, is this direct response and extension, explaining what you mean. And when you are done explaining what you mean in direct response to that question related to what we talked to earlier in the lesson, don't extend it further. Don't get into some other topic that's not related to the question. You can stop after you've explained your answer to the point where you have don't have any more to say about it here. Okay, so good. All right, so yeah, good. So I see a question here. What would be a good synonym if we're not going to use the word admire? Well, I went with something that's not fancy terminology here or anything like that. I think really respecting someone is a good synonym of admiring them. So that would be a good example of a paraphrase here. So that would be one way to do it. Another one I saw suggested from another student was to look up to someone. There's a nice phrasal verb that has that is a synonym with the word admire. So if you look up to someone or you really look up to them, you admire them and you respect them a lot. So that would be another way to say this, okay? My extended answer here, I really respect my grandfather because he wasn't afraid to follow his dreams. He became a pilot at a very young age. He got a PhD in philosophy and he traveled the world long before global travel became a common thing to do. Okay, so my extended answer here, I just wanted to provide some detail about why I respect my grandfather here. And my response looks very similar to many of yours, okay? So that's great. Keep practicing this. This is the disciplined practice that you want to have, answering questions clearly like this with appropriate paraphrases and extended answers. That is a skill that's going to get you very far on the speaking test if you practice it a lot, okay? Good. All right, I want to be mindful of the time here, and I definitely want to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions, as I promised to do. So we're going to go through these last points. We don't need to spend a long time on these last points here before we get into some Q&A time. Tip number 5, be prepared to slow down and give yourself time to think, okay? It is okay, and it will not bring your score down if you need to take a little bit of time to think about a response. In my experience, your perception, a student's perception of how long a pause takes when they are thinking about something in response to a question, their perception of it is that they are being silent for like 10 seconds, when actually that pause is probably only about a second or two. And when we are speaking naturally to others in our own native languages, this is something we do. We don't always just have rapid communication back and forth with the people that we are talking to, especially when someone asks you a difficult question, like they do in part 3 of the test. They're going to ask you a question or two that you might not be 100% familiar with an answer. You know, like they'll ask you a question that you haven't thought about before that much. And so you might need to take a second to think about what you're going to say. And that's okay. You can say things like, oh, well, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about this before. And then you take a moment and then you give your response. As long as your pauses are not caused by lack of vocabulary, and you know, if the interviewer thinks that you're pausing because you don't have the language or the fluency to respond, and that's very noticeable when you start. You know how it is when you start saying something, but then you don't really have the vocabulary word, that perfect word that you're trying to think of, and you're losing some fluency, and you're pausing for those reasons. That's pretty obvious for all, you know, for us to see as we're listening to folks who are responding to these questions. And so that is the kind of thing that brings your score down. But if the reason you're pausing is because you need to think of what to say and you're not quite certain, and then what you say after that pause is fluent and clear and makes a lot of sense, then that pause you took to think of your answer will not hurt your score, okay? So I hope that distinction, that difference is clear. Some pauses and lack of fluency are important if it's related to language, but if you need some time to think, you can ask for it, right? And you don't want to take a long time. You don't want to take 10 seconds for sure. But do practice learning phrases like, okay, well, if I had to say one thing I like about, you know, or one person that I admire a lot, I would say, it's my grandfather, okay? That kind of thing where you are giving yourself a little bit of time to respond is perfectly okay to do, okay? And that's just not me saying it. IELTS publishes, I don't have the page exactly in front of me here, but this is advice that's provided by IELTS examiners. I think we all see a lot of folks who are getting nervous and who are trying to speak really quickly and to speak as fluently as they can. But it would be beneficial for you to practice slowing the pace down just a little bit and giving yourself time to think when you need to have that time, okay? It's perfectly fine to do, and it will not pull down your score, okay? All right. 2 more, and then we're going to have some time for questions here at the end. Tip number 6, practice part 2 a lot, okay? At that resource I gave earlier in the talk, all of the Magoosh, the speaking questions PDF, we have a lot of part 2 questions on that PDF. I shared it earlier in the lesson. And but you can find sample questions lots of different places. Magoosh students, you've got practice interviews you can do, and you want to be practicing part 2. Part 2 is the part of the test you have the most control over, right? You can plan a response. You've got a little bit of time to plan your response, and you can really make big improvements on your score by having a strategy for this section of the test. So this is something we cover in lesson videos in Magoosh, but I just want to go over the strategy for part 2 is actually quite simple. It's not a complicated thing, but it's something you need to practice over and over to be effective at it. So here's a sample question for part 2. So describe your favorite method of travel. By the way, if you're pretty new to IELTS, you may not be familiar. For part 2 of the test, this is a time when you're supposed to give a monologue response. You're supposed to speak for 1 to 2 minutes, kind of a miniature speech that you're giving. And what happens is the interviewer is going to give you a piece of paper, a card, with this information, something like this on it, okay? And they're going to say, okay, I would like for you to talk about your favorite method of travel. Here's your topic card. You have 1 minute to prepare your response, and you'll then speak for 1 to 2 minutes on this topic. Okay, so that's what you do in part 2. And the approach you want, that I recommend strongly, the thing that I think you should practice over and over and over in preparation for part 2 is quite simple. The first thing you should do is read these questions quickly, but during your 1 minute time to prepare your response, you should not write notes about these. By the way, during your 1 minute, you can have pencil or pen and paper, and you can take notes about what you're going to say in your response. Okay, so you should use that. You should use that capability and write some notes, but don't write notes about these bullet points. These bullet points we just talked about answering questions directly just a moment ago in one of our tips. My recommendation for these is that you answer each one of these very directly and try to keep your answer short. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences as you're building up to the meat of your interview, the real substance of your part 2 response, which will come later here. Okay, so to answer this question, so you would say something like, all right, I'll just pretend like I'm answering this one in an interview. All right, so describe your favorite method of travel. I would say my favorite method of travel is to fly by airplane. Okay, so I have just answered bullet point number 1. Bullet point number 2, how often do you travel by this method? So flying by airplane is something that I used to do a lot. So before the pandemic, my family would take at least maybe 2 vacations a year, and we would often fly, sometimes to go home and see family, because I live in California and they live in Chicago, which is too far to drive in a short amount of time. So we would fly back home to see family a couple times a year. But during the pandemic, I don't fly as much. Okay, I probably said too much there. Okay, that answer took a little bit of explanation due to the pandemic, so I got into a little extra information. But I responded to point number 2. Point number 3, whether this travel method is cheap or expensive. And unfortunately, flying by airplane has become more expensive recently. It was cheap for a while because nobody was flying during the pandemic, but now I'm looking at airline prices, especially to some places my family would maybe like to go on vacation, and the flights are quite expensive now. Okay, so using the bullet points as notes, you just go through and provide a direct response to each one very quickly. Your 1 minute preparation time, then, you don't need to focus on these because your notes are there, your prompts, your reminders are there about what you're supposed to talk about, and these tend to be pretty easy questions. what you take your 1 minute to prepare for is this last question on the card. Here it says, and explain why this method of travel is your favorite. Okay, so what you want to do here is, again, answer this question directly and extend your answer. And this time, extending your answer, your goal ought to be to provide at least 2 main points to answer the question. Okay, so if I'm explaining why this method of travel is my favorite, okay, so I could say one reason that flying by airplane is my favorite way of traveling is that you can get to faraway places so quickly. Okay, that's a simple answer, right? But it's a direct answer to the question. All right, so I could extend it then by comparison to going by train or by driving across the country. I can get to my destination very quickly by airplane, and I don't waste a lot of time en route to that location. I can use my vacation time to actually be with family or with doing the things that I want to do during that time. So flying is a way to take advantage of the time that I have on my precious vacations, okay? Something like that, right? There's an extended answer to the question that we have here at the bottom of the screen. And then my goal should be to provide a second main point. So another reason why flying by airplane is my favorite is that I actually enjoy, strangely, hanging out in airports sometimes. I like people watching. I like seeing people and thinking about where they're going. I like even sometimes there are specific airports that have restaurants that I enjoy going to. And so the whole experience of flying is something that I enjoy, except when it goes wrong, of course, and there are delays and frustrations and things like that. But in general, I enjoy the experience of getting on a plane and going somewhere. Okay, so there's the response. What you want to do, again, during your 1 minute preparation time is to take some notes, to at least try to think of the 2 main ideas you want to talk about. And then you can write on your piece of paper what those main ideas are so that you can remember them when you're trying to talk about them during your part 2. Okay, this is my recommendation for how to use your time. And this is what I recommend you practice over and over and over in preparation for the test so that you can do it almost like by a habit. By the time it's test day, you know exactly how you're going to respond to this, and you're going to use this structure that you've been practicing so many times. It becomes like we have a phrase, second nature. You don't have to think about it, you can just do it. And that's what I recommend highly for part 2. Okay, good. A question came in about that. Can we quote examples while providing reasons we like it? Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. You can quote examples. That's great. Examples are good, especially if they clarify or you use them to extend your answer, your direct answer that you just provided. Examples are fabulous details to add as explanation for whatever point you made in your direct response. Yeah, good question. Good. Okay, so looking at the time here, last tip. This one's really, really, really fast. But the last thing that I highly recommend that you do, especially to help you with part 3 of the test, is to practice English outside of your comfort zone. Okay, what is your comfort zone? Your comfort zone is likely to be questions that you're going to answer for part 1 of the test, right? So I use this example for myself. When I was younger, when I was in college, I lived in Costa Rica and I was studying Spanish. And I actually, in a few short months of living there, I had studied Spanish for a few years. Within a few months of being in Costa Rica, I got actually pretty fluent in certain conversations. If people asked me questions about my family, about what I was studying, about why I was living in Costa Rica, about daily life kind of things, that questions that you would find on part 1 of the speaking test, very similar topics as those. That was my comfort zone. And I could talk rapidly and fluently. And people actually thought, hey, wow, Eliot's Spanish is really, really good. But as soon as the topic turned to something else, like a news story that I didn't have much background about. Or some other, maybe I was talking to somebody, I was in college at the time, about some topic that came up in a college class. My fluency was gone. And of course, the reason why is because I didn't have a fluent grasp of vocabulary to talk about those topic areas. They were outside of my comfort zone in Spanish. All of us, all of you out there, no matter your ability, there are going to be some areas, it's natural, that you may not have a lot of comfort talking about. So my recommendation for the speaking test here is that you focus on areas and reading about, trying to talk about topics that are not ones that you typically will talk about on a daily basis in English. Okay, now some of you are living in places where English is not spoken regularly. I know some of you out there are probably in places like the UK or the United States or Australia right now. So you're going to have different opportunities to gain exposure to these types of things. But these are the topic areas that you're typically going to find covered somewhere on the speaking test. And, if you are a person who doesn't typically talk or think about sports very much, or the topic of, let's say, advertising and business related sort of topics, then it would be a good idea for you to go seek out some material related to those things, to think about them, and if possible, to talk about those topics a little bit, right? I shared a resource earlier in this class about from the New York Times with all those speaking topics. I think all of these topic areas would be found somewhere in those questions that are in the 550 questions that are on that resource for you. But you may have a newspaper that you read, or a magazine, or a podcast, or something like that that you go to for topics like this. I would recommend, I'm sure everybody's familiar with TED Talks, TED. You can go and find TED Talks where you listen to a lecture and try to acquire vocabulary related to some of these topic areas. It's an important thing to do, to get outside of your comfort zone, if at all possible, and to talk about these topics. I've done it several times in this class, but another reason I want to plug the Conversation Club for all of you Magoosh students, because what I'm trying to do for the questions that we respond to for part 3 of the test is to replicate this experience where I'm providing questions to everybody who comes, who that are about these topics, but also are likely to be unfamiliar to you, so that it requires you to stretch a little bit and get outside of your comfort zone a little bit. Okay, so another reason to come to Conversation Club. Okay, good. So some questions came in here. Can we look at our notes while speaking? Yes, you may look at your notes. You can have that. You can have that card there, the topic card, and so you can see. I'm going to put this on the screen. You can use these bullet points as notes that are already there for you, just reminders of what you're supposed to say. And then you can write your personal notes about this last question down below. And so those, you shouldn't write a lot. You definitely don't want to write full sentences that you plan on reading. That will actually hurt your score. And you don't have time to do that really anyway. You should make bullet points like these as reminders of the ideas that you want to say in response to this last question. Yes, you can look at those notes and you can write them down. Okay. All right. Oh boy, lots to talk about here, and it came up to the end of the time. I wasn't expecting. I was expecting to have a little more time, and this has actually happened several times so far with these lessons. So I apologize for that. I need to work on timing a little bit. I do have a little bit of time here. We can take some questions from you out there. If you have any, go ahead and put them in the chat. Please don't unmute yourself because the audio is going to cause some issues for us. But if you've got a question for me, you can put it in the chat here. While you're thinking of your questions, I've got a couple of other things here. So if you're anybody who's out there on YouTube, you're not a Magoosh student yet, we've got a promotional going on. So if you decide you want to sign up for Magoosh, you can be part of these live lessons and the Conversation Club I'm talking about, and all the other things there related to Magoosh and how we help prepare for the IELTS exam. you can use this promotional code to get a discount, save some money. So that's for folks out there on YouTube tuning in. And any other questions coming in? We had a question way earlier on in the lesson. My speaking band score is stuck at around 6.5. How can I improve this? Oh man, that's a good question. It's a complicated answer. I'm sure it's one that many people would have. We went over a lot of things in this. Lesson that I would recommend as a place to start addressing this issue. I think it will be important that you maximize your score related to some of these strategic things that we were talking about. If there were new things that you picked up today about responding to questions directly and extending answers and things like that, about how to approach part 2 of the test, those can be effective ways to bump up your score in particular areas. If your 6.5 is a reflection of your fluency or your grammar ability and some of those other topic areas that they score on the speaking test, then there are often no shortcuts for that. It's going to require you to work on your fluency and your grammar or your vocabulary regularly. So I hope you're doing that. Keeping a vocabulary journal, trying to learn 10, 15 new words every day, that you're doing some of the things we talked about earlier in the lesson, like trying to practice speaking regularly, even if you're by yourself and you can only speak for 10 or 15 minutes every day, answering some IELTS-like questions, okay, that, in those resources we shared earlier, that fluency work can help. It's like exercise, like we talked about earlier in the lesson. So that would be a place to start. If you think it's just your underlying English ability that's pulling your score down just a little bit below where you want to score, okay? All right, everybody. So I'm not seeing any new questions come in. One second, I'm looking at the notes. Oh yes, I nearly forgot. We've been running a promotional here with YouTube. You YouTube students are out there, and then all of the Magoosh students who are in the call as well. It's not really a promotional. It's we've been celebrating the fact that we've added live classes to the core curriculum for Magoosh students. So part of that is that and as a way to kind of encourage everybody to show up on the first classes here, we've been having a giveaway. So the giveaway, we've been choosing one particular student every class and giving away some stuff from Magoosh. So that person today is Pablo Tehran. If you're out there, Pablo, you can email the email address that was provided in the chat, and you'll get some free graded speaking assessments from Magoosh as a thank you for attending and as a prize from us. Okay, so Pablo, go ahead and email the email address that's in the chat there. Congratulations, you're the winner for today. Okay, well, we are over time here by a couple of minutes. I'm going to for you Magoosh students, I'm going to put this recording in your, recordings go up about an hour or two after our sessions. If you look on your dashboard in Magoosh, you can see there where you can click in and find the recording, but it takes a little bit of time for Zoom to process these things. So I'll add it here later on today. If there are things you wanted to revisit from the lesson, you can turn there and check it out. But we have Conversation Club tomorrow for the Magoosh students at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific time. And then on Thursday, we've got another lesson related to speaking. We're going to take a different focus and dig a little deeper into some of the strategy for the speaking section. So please come on Thursday for that, for the next class that we have going there. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you all. Thanks for your participation. It's nice to see a nice large group of students here and on YouTube, and hope to see you all in the upcoming classes. Have a nice day, everybody. We'll see you soon.